So first, I think, is anybody want to introduce Zhuangzi for the people who don't know? Anybody want to volunteer to talk about Zhuangzi? Get a brief introduction. I cannot assume everybody knows Zhuangzi.
I'm willing to volunteer.
Okay, Quen, please. Okay, just make it within 2 minutes. Okay.
2 minutes. Okay. So Chuang Tzu was a Chinese philosopher of the 4th century BCE. He was a contemporary of Mencius, which is a major Confucianist philosopher. I would say that he probably is the most aesthetic and bold Chinese philosopher of classical China in terms of play with language. Because if you take the Confucianist school texts, they are in general quite rigorous and logical. And Chuang Tzu is a master to use to put logic on its head, to introduce that what I would call dialectics, because some chapters of the Chuang Tzu would remind very much of the conversation between Socrates and his disciples in the Plato dialogues, in the sense that the end result is not have an answer. The end result is to provoke your mind to many paths of reasoning and many possible answers. And I agree with the people who talked at the beginning that the true subject of Zhuangzi is truly the journey to discover and to explore human nature, or the journey of the human soul, or to talk with a more technical words, the epistemological journey. And I would stop here.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. And I personally, I agree with what your assessment talk about aesthetic. I kind of think about his language and his thought is very beautiful. Okay, even translated to English, you still keep the beauty of his language over there. So I personally always compare Zhuangzi with Nietzsche, okay, especially Nietzsche's Zarathustra. Okay, I compare them basically the same, and the purpose is not only philosophical and also provoke your thinking and to understand yourself. So that's my assessment about Zhuangzi. Thank you. So let's talk about back to this paper, and I hope everybody reads the paper and the author. I think that's the third time we read Dr. Schwitzgebel, okay, his writing, and the first time we talk about, I think the mentions moral reasoning, and the second paper, I think in May, we talk about, he compared the Xunzi and the Mencius with the Western philosopher Rousseau and Thomas Hobbes. Okay, so I think we spent 2 weeks to read his paper. I would say his paper is pretty plain and easy to read, and that's why I like to choose his paper. And then we may not all agree his view, but it is for the easy to understand for the people who doesn't know much about Chinese philosophy. I think his paper is pretty good. So let me read Zhuangzi, by which I mean Zhuangzi of the inner chapter. Okay, in the Zhuangzi, they have in general, we have the 7 inner chapter. In general, we believe these 7 chapters were written by Zhuangzi himself, and they have an outer chapter and have the miscellaneous chapter. Total is 33, and the rest are not written by Zhuangzi, probably by his disciple, or a lot of them are later be added by the people, probably much later, probably 100 years later. So we don't know. But here, the author confine what Zhuangzi is in the 7 inner chapter of the book, like traditional attribute to him, does not especially value. He said that Zhuangzi is not especially value spontaneous, skillful responsiveness. He criticizes skill more than he praises it. I'm not sure this is, I think James and Pin disagree. I'm not sure it's this. He disagree on Zhuangzi criticize the
No, I agree. I agree with this part.
Okay,
I disagree with some of his other points.
Okay, that's fine. Okay. He does not see skill as a particular worth aiming for, and he does not particularly admire people who display skillful mastery of their arts. A close reading of the inner chapter finds Zhuangzi criticizes skillfulness, at least as often as he celebrates. And even the famous passage about the ox carving cook permit an interpretation that does not emphasize the value of skill. I think that's the part some Pin or other people disagree. Okay, we will go over there. Okay, so at beginning, that's kind of like a little focus more on the text. So at least for the before 2 o'clock, okay, before 1 o'clock, let's focus more on the text. So so we will know what he's talking about. Then after 2 o'clock, okay, we can express more about your opinion and agree or disagree. And right now, what I try to do is try to focus on the text and about what Zhuangzi talking about. I kind of feel like the first part, probably for the people who are not familiar with Zhuangzi, may be difficult to read it. So I kind of find out the text, but not all, some of them. So for the reference, if we take this passage as face value, it seems that overall Zhuangzi rejects the value of artisanal, aesthetic, and the musical skill. He does not celebrate such skill, much less privilege them as his ideal. His idea appears instead to be smooth, like lazing about, doing nothing, mastering nothing, and serving no purpose. I have not cherry pick this passage to make my point. They are something close to a complete list of the explicit discussion of artisan, like skill in the inner chapter, except the passage of ox carving cook, to which I turn. So I think that everybody should agree, right, on the Zhuangzi talk about skill. He's talking not the artisan skill. He more like talking about the lazing about, doing nothing, mastering nothing, and serving no purpose, this kind of skill. That's the author insists. And the author believes he not cherry pick, he's a complete list. I kind of think through, and then I would say he did a good job to pick all the story about the skill. Not 100%, some are arguable, but I think at least he did a good job, in my opinion. Any comment on this one before we go to his example? I will hold.
Yeah, I agree with half of that.
Some story you are not agree.
I do agree a lot of the stories about skills is not about skill. There's a more philosophical meaning to this story. But I don't think that Zhuangzi is trying to say that lazing about is better. You have to read the chapter Zhuangzi, all things equal. It's and also the first chapter about true happiness. It's a big topic, but okay. So I shouldn't go on here. But I think there's in this conclusion, there is cherry picking. The author may not see it, but whenever you choose something, it's cherry picking. Just like Zhuangzi said, whenever you play an instrument, you pluck one string, you already chose a note. Yeah.
Okay, so we have a few hands up.
Jason?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not an expert on the text. I can just sort of like see that Zhuangzi is very much into hyperbole. He uses hyperbole as a technique from the paper. I could see that, and from the story about the big bird. So this is and using these ridiculous comparisons, and that's even evident in the ox carving story. So that's just a trait. This is obviously a trait of Zhuangzi, and I think the author is he betrays himself. He says that he doesn't believe that the athlete is actually capable of thinking about his actions, that they have to be spontaneous. And this is a kind of like a lazy type of mind-body duality. To me, it seems like he's betraying his epistemology, and that's really the cause of his point of view here, is he thinks that spontaneous action needs to be defended from the idea of skill as an extension of understanding. So in other words, the idea that the mind and body actually work together and they're the same thing, that concept is kind of ruled out in mind-body duality, and that's the author's point of view, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Phil, please.
Yeah, I think that there is a difference between like technical skill and conceptual skill. And I think he's not saying that they're disconnected. They are on different levels. And to me, the first person I thought of actually was Deng Xiaoping. Because there's a pragmatism about connecting the inner knowledge to the external world. And what he said was, what's the difference between a white cat and a black cat, as long as it catches the mouse? So that's a practical manifestation of a concept of ideology, you would say, like, because the real manifestation in the world is that it actually works. And that's the case, whether it's a tiger, or an ostrich or a human being, you have to also consider the context and its manifestation.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you for the cat story. But the answer is the cat is red, not black, not white, it's red.
He did mention the red, but
He did mention it's red. So, Kimberly, please.
So I really like this passage. I think it's sort of is the essence of Taoism, in my opinion. The reason I think that this is very important is human beings just, in terms of our survival instinct, we want to acquire more skills, and which in a lot of cases, not just in modern day, but if you look at modern day, the skill is sort of a salesmanship. Whatever skill you acquire, you want to peddle it so that your life becomes easier, or you acquire, whether it's a material or reputation, may not have a monetary benefit. But for example, if you're a monk, Buddhist monk, you go up in the mountain, you do years of a meditation, and then, just to, people do want to show that their method is better than others' method of a meditation, or, whatever pursuit they pursue, they want the world to know their method is better. So if I'm peddling, let's say cookware as a salesman, what's the difference between saying my cookware is better than yours, which a lot of times people will say my meditating method is better. So religious people, in by and large, get away with showmanship and salesmanship because they have that cloak of holiness in front of them. But they do peddle whatever it is. They're actually superior salesmen, just look a lot more benign and holistic. But so that's where I think when they say do nothing, and in terms of either do or do not do something, again, it's if I could put it in two simple words, when you do something, you acquire skill, and that's knowledge. When you don't do something, you actually transcend the need to have the knowledge, and you acquire wisdom. So you are advising people not to take action. So non-action is much more difficult to accomplish, because we as a animal always want to take action. So not doing something is much difficult, therefore so much harder to accomplish that state of wisdom. So so that, if I could just compare do something or do not do something, it's like Western philosophy or Western way of thinking versus the Eastern. The other point I want to make is when you have a skill, when you think you master something better than others, whether it's a breathing technique or martial arts or building atomic bombs, do nothing is much in the long run is beneficial. Things will get done because despite of all that teaching, human beings are going to do things. So in that sense, when you do something, you're always going toward dogmatism because you want to be the best. So the next guy that comes along looks better, you're going to kill their way of thinking by promoting dogmatism. So anybody that is skillful in anything, commercialism or spiritual pursuit, they always tend toward dogmatism because we cannot handle competition of any sort, So that tends to go toward dogmatism. So in the end, our pursuit of a skill or knowledge just purely based on, that kind of an instinct is going to implode from within. And we can see that in our Western society much faster because we are acquiring knowledge at a, unbelievable speed. So I would say that, even Jesus said the meek will inherit the earth. He got that message, even though he's not an Eastern, maybe he did go to India and acquire this kind of knowledge, no action. So,
okay. Kimberly, I have to put on stop here. Okay, thank you so much. And then we will have more chance to talk about this. So I have to move on. Okay, so I will have Jeannie, Pin, and Jeannie and Pin and Fred if you want to talk. Okay, so and then after Fred, I'm going to move on, and then I have to control my time a little bit. Okay, Jeannie, please.
When you are trying to be at best at something and acquiring certain skills in whatever area, field, then you are living a competitive life. You're being competitive, and competitiveness always have tendency to lead to more strife among people. So I do see where Zhuangzi is coming from by stating what he's stating here and promoting this non-skillful kind of an existence. I do see where he's going with this. I agree.
Thank you, Jeannie. I just like to, when I hear all about different opinions, I just really appreciate what Zhuangzi is doing because probably that's what he wants. And I think depend on the how much you read, what did you read, and what life stage you read, and the people tend to have a different opinion. So it's great. Everybody have your own opinion, and then we will see what we get, after this meetup. Pin, please.
Yes, thanks everyone for so many excellent points. So I had a chance to organize my thoughts a little better. Could you show that author's quote again?
This one?
Yeah. So, okay, I just want to clarify one thing is that in the stories where, the author says Zhuangzi's ideal appears instead to be something like lazy about doing nothing, and so on. In those stories, Zhuangzi's point is really like our friend who just did the excellent intro about Zhuangzi. As Zhuangzi really wants to break down people's natural judgmentalism and free people to think out of the box. So in those stories, often it's someone criticizing Zhuangzi for saying that you're a useless person or your philosophy is useless. And then Zhuangzi basically was try to illustrate that what's useful and what's useless is subjective. It's just like the hand lotion, someone makes it and can hardly sell a few of them, but someone else saw the lotion would be very useful for the army soldiers on their expeditions to cold places. All of a sudden, it's immensely useful. So how useless and useful is how you look at it and what you do with it. So his point is not that I have this ideal and that everyone should be lazy about doing nothing. He's actually just trying to break down people's seeing things as one better than the other necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Fred, do you want to say something?
I think I'll defer until the second half because it's more a commentary on this. So if we can come back to this particular slide later, that'd be appreciated.
Okay, thank you. You got the priority next time. Okay, thank you, Fred. Okay, so I kind of list on the first part of the paper and all the story the author list. Okay, so I just list up here, and the most are on the first chapter, so-called wandering around and about. Talk about the big bird, the small bird, and then this one, I think he is talking. I don't want to spend too much time on the first chapter since Pin promised he is going to do a further introduction on this chapter next year. Is that right, Pin? Oh, Pin's not here. Okay.
Yeah, yes, I would like to. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, because this chapter is very important and very interesting, and then Pin would like to. So I'm not going to go all the detail about the story, okay? But basically, you talk about the very big bird. The very beginning talk about very big bird and the very small bird, and then the different skill set, and then talk about 列子. 列子 being considered as spirit or so-called he can travel around, and then talk about 惠子 is quote, okay, and then so basically talk about different usage of things. I'm going to that's the story on the first chapter, and talk about yak and the wassail, because talk about the huge animal even cannot catch the mice, right? Because the skill set is not useful for all. That's Zhuangzi's idea, the big, small, and the relative thing. Second part, Zhuangzi is talking about the chapter 2, the equalizing things. Talk about useless skills, okay? Basic, talk about sophist, musician, and drummer, okay? I will have the quote on that. And then he talked about cooking. We will save later, okay, about cooking. And talk about on the chapter 4, he talked about new concept of Qiao, okay, and the fronting mantis, because the mantis is, think about he has a lot of skill, and but actually so small, just like human, you know, some people think they are skillful, and then, but actually it's not, okay. So, and then talk about ugly man and the so-called horse head and the humpback, okay. And they talk about the, I think Kimberly talk about the skill, just the salesmanship. Okay, here's an example. Okay, just mere the connection, skill is mere salesmanship. And then number 6, talk about the great teacher, Xu Yu. He talk about, according to the legend, Xu Yu, Yao, the ancient sage king, try to give the country, give the sovereignty to Sun. But before he give to Sun, he give to Xu Yu. Xu Yu is so-called a very smart, skillful person or whatever, and then he reject. I will bring some text about this one. Is anything anybody want to talk about on one of this story, or you want to know more detail about one of this story? Please raise your hand, or so we can go a little bit on, because I don't want to go every single story. That's probably too much. And then if you have some specific story you are interested, and please bring up. Pin, please.
I think Madeline was there first. Madeline.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay. Let me see. Okay, I don't see all the hands. Okay, hold on. Madeline and Kimberly, then Phil, please. Okay.
I just wanted to say I agree with you, Jason, on what a skilled writer this man is. The description of Horsehead Humpback as a man whose ugliness astounded all the world. It was incredible. I loved it.
Okay, I have more text on that. I will show. Okay, we will do some reading on that. Okay. Next one, Kimberly, please.
I agree with Madeline. I love that ugly horseback humpback who declined invitation of the emperor to come and advise him. So that's a truly virtuous and wise man. But what is the definition of a useless skill in this context?
Okay, I will bring up this one. I have the text let's talk about. Okay, it's a little bit subtle. And
okay, well, that's my first question. And the second question is there such a thing as a useless skill in human life?
I think he talked about some uses. For example, his example, that's my interpretation. Okay, when in the first chapter, he talked about the yak. Yak is a huge animal, right? Okay, and he said it's so powerful, but you can but his skill is useless because he cannot catch the mouse, right? Because it's so big. So and then on the story about the Huizi's quote, okay, he said Huizi has a huge quote and too big. He doesn't know how to use it. So basics, he talked about the thing is useless, but if you find the right situation, you can use it. So Zhuangzi's suggestion is so huge, you cannot use it. You can cut it and make it as a boat. You can use that one, right? So the skill, useful or useless, is depend on the situation. Okay? Mm-hmm. Talk about the bomb. He talk about people. There's a family. They know they are good or skillful to make or expert to make the bomb for chopping. He tried to sell, make money, but cannot make so much money because I think he tried to sell the people in the South. So people don't need this. So this skill is useless. But when he go to the other place, because the place they want to, I think one country want to fight another country. So the king decide to buy the bomb. Okay, so you can use in the military. So they can make a lot of money. So basically, Zhuangzi talk about the usefulness. Okay, is it useful or not useful? It depends on the situation. So okay, that's
I think he's advocating the fact that we ought to look at our human definition of a usefulness, because if we go by usefulness of making something quick and profitable, then we're missing the whole story. Is what he's trying to say, I believe, because in a communal society, it isn't the ones that are most productive materialistically and the quickest in wit and all that contribute. Those who are quiet and look almost useless, yes, but they make the best uncle, the best friends, best relatives that people want to go visit, because the ones that are really sharp and aggressive, they're kind of pain in the ass to be around a lot of times. So we need a slow-witted, very soft approach of appraising one's worthiness in a community.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's the purpose of Zhuangzi. He doesn't give you a fixed answer. Okay, what do you think about the meaning of useless? Okay, usefulness. Okay, so we will have chance to talk more about this. Phil, please.
Yeah, Jason, I agree with you. It depends on the context. And because the situation always changes, it means adaptability. The adaptability to different situation, because you have to depend on the context. That's why the yak cannot catch the mouse, because it only adapted to something else. I also want to say something about salesmanship. Like, no, it's really in some sense an animal instinct, right? Because it's not necessarily human brought it to a different level, But the lion will roar to advertise that better not mess with it, okay? And the gazelle, who's his prey, will jump high in very different direction and says, well, don't attack me, because attack that weaker one, because I could jump out of the way anytime. And so there's even advertisements in nature itself to don't mess with me. So with the tree, the ugly tree, who is so useless that it's an eyesore, nobody wants it, until somebody comes in and see that, oh, you know, I bought the land, I gotta cut it down because it's blocking the view of the mountains and the sky and the rivers. So it was useless and it survived, but now the context has changed and it's going to be cut down just to be thrown away, not for the use, but because it was an eyesore. So it depends on the situation. You have to be adaptable if you want to manifest, in some sense, the Tao through nature, because the Tao of just transcendental ideas or whatever it is useless, but all things have to manifest itself in the world.
Thank you, Phil. Pin, please.
Yeah. You know what Phil just said actually is one of the chapters in the other chapters in Zhuangzi. The mountain, well, I don't know if Phil already read that chapter, but where he just wrote the chapter again, reinvented the chapter. That's amazing. So yes, and I also agree with Kimberly what she said about, you know, Zhuangzi wants to break down our preconceived notions of usefulness, and when you said that, you know, that's the purpose of Zhuangzi. So if I may, I'll tell a very quick, talk real quickly about the cicada and the dove, the chapter 1. Yeah. So it's a story about there's a great bird so big that when it flies, it covers up a whole part of the sky. So the bird basically prepares for many years. It has to fly to the South Pole. And to do that, it needs to prepare itself for many years, and then it finally takes off. You know, it's this big, big to do. And then on its way, it ran across a small bird, kind of like a sparrow. And the sparrow asked where the big bird was going. The bird, you know, and then the sparrow laughs at the big bird, saying, "Why would you want to do something like that? Fly that far? You know, I dashed up and down the trees, and I'm really happy. You know, have find enough food." So the point is that happiness is different for everyone. The big bird is kind of born to do that, and it's not happy unless it does that. But if you apply that to the sparrow will see it as torture, right? Unnecessary labor to do such a thing. And the sparrow is really just truly happy, just flying around in the forest amongst a grove of trees. Everyone is different. Happiness and freedom and liberty is different for everyone. Everyone should recognize that and not judge. Be happy with oneself and not and let other people be. That's how I, you know, my interpretation of that story.
Yeah, I think the go ahead. Yeah.
Also, Zhuangzi, you know, the inner chapter, Zhuangzi, his composition often does this thing, where he argues one side and make you think that side makes a lot of sense. And then he next argues the opposite side, and that makes a lot of sense too. And then he basically shows you that neither one is true. So Zhuangzi's writing is beautiful, and also I do agree that a big purpose is to break down people's preconceived notions about things.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking. And when you talk about big birds and the small birds, let's talk about the space, right? He also talk about the time, right? He talk about like for some like I introduced last week, we talk about the Pengzu, okay, my ancestor, he lived for 820 years, and even consider it's it's long life. But some animal, okay, the birds, right? There are some birds, the birds just born in the morning and they die in the afternoon. He doesn't know the spring and autumn, but they have their own time scale also, and it's difficult to judge. 820 years is long life or short, or just one born in the morning, die in the afternoon is short. They have their own meaning. At least that's Zhuangzi talk about. And same as the skill, you have a different skill and you have your own meaning. And it's difficult, just like Pin said, it makes no sense to judge other people's, other animal or other set of skill. Dave, please.
Yeah, thanks, sir. I want to get back to the yak and weasel. To me, the secret is perspective. If I've got some mice around my house, the weasel will be very valuable. But the yak, they say, is useless, but I think he's a pack animal. So when the farmer is ready to haul some crop to market, the yak will be very useful to put the crop on his back. So I think the mistake is using the same measure to measure two different things. In the West, we call comparing apples and oranges. So thank you very much for a nice session today.
Thank you. Yeah, one thing I think Kimberly talk about the usefulness. Okay, so the usefulness. I think. Are you seeing the screen? Okay, so the usefulness. One example of the usefulness is that's not in the inner chapter when. They talk about, Zhuangzi talk about the usefulness. They visit a house and at that time they eat dog. So there's the two dogs. They decide to kill one dog as a food for the guest. So they choose the dog doesn't bark because the dog is useless. So kill that dog and eat it, okay? So the lesson is this, you are useless, so you got eaten. But later on, when Zhuangzi and his disciple rest in the huge tree, and then the disciple say, wow, the tree is huge, okay? And the Zhuangzi said, well, how can this tree can grow so big? Because the tree is totally useless. So should we be useful or become useless? So Zhuangzi's answer is funny. It's between useful and useless. So that's up to you to interpret. But he tried to talk about the usefulness and the uselessness in a different concept. Phil, please.
Yeah, I see it a little bit different, although I agree with that, a little bit different. The problem with a perspective is that it's trapped you in one way of seeing, because there's other ways of seeing as different birds, different animals, different trees are in the perspective. And human beings should be wise enough to have multiple perspectives, not the perspective of a single bird, and so forth. And so therefore, in some sense, it does open up the possibility of not uselessness, but there are different ways of seeing things and knowing the things and maybe putting things into practice. That's ability we've been given to see multiple perspectives, but we insist on seeing it, and we actually developed the argument, well, that's your point of view, right? Well, that's true, except I see it from different points of view, and you're the one that has a single point of view. So.
Hey, Phil, right. But I think animals are superior because they don't have any perspective.
Yeah, right. Well, unfortunately, we're stuck as human beings.
Yeah, we learn from animal pretty soon. Yeah,
that's right.
Madeline, yeah, please.
Yes, following on to Dave and Phil about measurement and perspective, I was visualizing a giant bird that flies and takes up most of the sky. And I realized that depending on where you are and where the bird is, that if a sparrow were very close to your face, the sparrow would take up most of the sky.
Thank you, Madeline. Okay, so let's move on, and then let me bring some of the text. So that's all. So this one is talk about I think that's the useless skills. I don't title it right, but let me introduce this text. That's the text the author talk about. Zhao Wen is a person's name. Zhao Wen played his lute. Okay, that's an ancient Chinese instrument. And Shi Kuang held his baton. Okay, so basically he is famous for his accompaniment. Okay, and the Huizi leaned against the big tree. So that's a question. Okay, according to the Chinese, that's lean against the big tree. The author talk about it's a desk stumping, but some interpretation he's singing or orating or debating. Basically, he's good in the talking. Okay, so the knowledge basically meant the skill of these three masters were almost perfect, and they passes their successes on to later years. They become famous and keep in the historical book. What they like, they try to set apart from other things. They try to illuminate, but they only succeeded in illuminating the other things and ended the gloom of hot and white. Here he talk about the sophistry. Okay, that's another story. Okay, and here he talk about just stick with the sophistry. Okay. And their follower ended up tangled in the string of words, and were incomplete their whole life. Basically, here he is used these three masters. They are good in some musical artisan, some spatial technique or skill, and they become famous. They have the student to learn, and he said that you focus so much on this skill. You focus on one thing, you miss another thing. Okay, and you think you are focused one thing, but turn out you are famous for the other thing. So you think you complete something, but actually you are not complete, and you incomplete in your whole life. So that's my understanding. Zhuangzi is talking about the skill, and if you focus on skill, you only doing on one thing, and then you miss other things. So the worst situation is you even become incomplete in your whole life. I think another example we could see a lot of genius. Okay, for example, Mozart, right? He focused so much focus on his skill, but the question will be whether or not you want to live a life like Mozart. His life is short, he's poor, broken, and he's famous, but his life is incomplete. Okay, other than music, he doesn't achieve other things. So that's the life you want? I think that's what Zhuangzi want to tell you, as you to think about it when you focus on the skill. Any comment on this one?
Yeah, I think it's right. I think that teaching is that hard. When you're teaching, it's really impossible to teach yourself. I couldn't, when I was a music teacher, I couldn't teach Mozart to a student. I couldn't teach myself to a student. I couldn't even teach the piano exercises that I practiced to become a piano player. Because they came in once a week, for 50 minutes. And it's basically, what do you plan for? What do you try to pass on? The idea was that you were supposed to teach them songs. And so you teach them songs and as many other skills as you can, but you never really teach yourself unless maybe you have all the time available for them to continually attend your a 24-hour school, kind of like maybe Aristotle had, something like that, you know, where the teacher is always there, and you just simply walk out of your practice room and you could have a lesson whenever you want. Yeah, then you can sort of become the teacher, but it is a kind of limited, it's a limited, teaching is a limited profession.
Thank you. SK, please.
Hey, so this one is quite, it makes us think about what is skill and what do we mean by use? Right. So what does it, so here somebody has a skill in flute playing, somebody has skill in, I guess, writing, reading, whatever, understanding, you know, science, stuff like that. So the observer of that output, the observer then focuses on what has been eliminated by this artist. But it does not, the last line is very, very important for me. Their followers end up tangled in the strings of works or the string of works and were incomplete their whole lives. So this incompleteness, right? So a lot of the times the focus is outwards. You know, the whole, I think this whole parable to me is pointing to the fact that skills are so sense-oriented. They are not self-oriented, you know? So they are very much outward focused. And what we forget is what is important. And what happens when you go out as a skillful person, you present something, you are effectively misleading everybody to focus on, let's say, art or acting or singing or whatever, right? So, and what happens is because they are getting stimulated from one art to another art to another art, another art, and we are living in that society, right? You know, Netflix binging or whatever you want to call it. We are going away misleading from our own illumination, you know, our own incompleteness for everybody. Forget about the skilled artist. So that's the last line is very important for me. And I think we are going to touch upon this on the December 4th discussion.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Phil, please.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I put the blame somewhere else. I think civilization itself is problematic. As it gets more and more complex, you actually do need skills to operate in civilization, particularly in modern civilization where you have to be a specialist. We would all like to be able to be like Aristotle back in those days when you could know all sorts of things, you know, or even in Renaissance, like, you know, like Leonardo. But we are so specialized that you cannot even specialize in a discipline. You have to specialize in a subdiscipline, you know, like, you know, atomic physics versus mechanical physics. And so, I mean, it's like you can't communicate. You cannot communicate with yourself. And so this is just a pressure of civilization that we created this ecosystem that we have to live in, you know, and at best, if you're at all in a civil society, is that you reserve time to go out and be unskilled. I mean, like, it's like, try paying your apartment rent or whatever it is by saying, hey, look, I've been just sort of wandering around, you know, everything is good. And they say, well, not so good after all. So I think civilization is in contrast to nature, and we have to bring it into better harmony. I don't know how you could do it if you're going to be such a complex society. And that's always been the problem, is how do you manifest it in a human structure when nature is boundless. So I agree with everything you say. I try to live my life that way, but nonetheless, I also do have a skill. So I am also limited in my way, but I don't want to stay totally unlimited.
Thank you, Phil. You let me think about Rousseau. You know, I think you have the same attitude as Rousseau. So, you know, Okay, so let's move on. Oh, okay, we have a, okay, let's do this. We have a Pin, Tony, Quinn. Okay, then I'm going to move on. Okay, Pin, please.
That's okay. Yeah, I spoke a lot. Yeah, let other people speak. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, that's Tony and Quinn. Okay, Tony, please.
Hi guys, enjoying the conversation, and I also wanted to echo what Phil was saying because you know, one of the things that I was disagreeing when I was reading the paper was it seemed to suggest that a lot of skills are just either innate or they can come up, like we can pick them up as long as we are not being interfered with. But like I don't think anyone is going to innately know how to perform like a heart surgery or something like that, or I don't think anyone's going to innately know like the civil engineering required to like we have sustainable infrastructure in our cities and everything like that. And another thing that I wanted to like mention was the sense that I was getting, what the author's interpretation of Zhuangzi is that Zhuangzi was almost contemptful of the idea of acquiring skill. And if you get down like towards the bottom of it, he seemed to he say he would rather be lazy sitting around underneath the tree rather than becoming skilled at achieving mastery at catching rats. So I was wondering, I mean, why would one reduce every endeavor to something as menial, perhaps? I mean, I guess we could call it menial as chasing rats. I mean, if I took a look at the I agree in the sense that the acquisition of skill, being obsessed about it is perhaps, not a healthy way, not a healthy outlook on life, and you're probably going to become a pretty lopsided human being. But the paper itself, I mean, if I was looking through the stories, it just doesn't present good enough reasons to not pursue skill. It didn't. Like, I mean, all the things that it was mentioning, for example, we can outshine the master and end up winning ourselves enemies, or, that we can develop a penchant for unhealthy competition that may lead to conflict, or that we may excessively we may spend excessive time in acquiring skills that may not be appreciated. All these reasons, they're not necessarily antithetical to the acquisition of skill itself. So that's just some thoughts that I wanted to share. So perhaps I'm not well versed in Zhuangzi, but perhaps his own thesis was not very particularly well developed into like perhaps giving good reasons as to why skills should not be skills should not be acquired, if that was the message, because I mean we're not reading his his direct message, but rather an interpretation of whatever his message was to this Eric guy. So those are just some thoughts that came to my mind. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Tony. I just like to put one line is Zuangzi never write a systematic reasoning to argue, okay? And then, so he just writes story, and his argument may not try to convince you. He probably just try to want to put the seeds then in your mind, just give you a doubt, okay? When someday something happens, you start to doubt, am I going to acquire more skill? I think that's his purpose. But again, that's my understanding. And everybody have a different interpretation.
Sorry to jump in. I just want to reiterate my point that this is the author's misinterpretation of Zhuangzi, in my opinion.
Okay, that's focus. Later on, we can focus on this part. Yeah. Quen and Kimberly.
Okay, I would like to offer the following interpretation. For me, Zhuangzi is not against skill. On the contrary, okay, because we human have a mind, and we human, contrary to the animals, because someone said that it's better to be an animal. I don't think so, because we have a big intellect, and because of that intellect can be a blocking stone, we have to go higher in the journey of our soul to use that intellect as a master use a servant. And that servant would be a beautiful servant when the master would be present. And I would like to make a rapid link with Confucius, because in the Analects, the Lun Yu, in chapter 2, paragraph 4, Confucius said that at 15, I devoted myself to study. At 30, I took my stand in society. At 40, I was no more confused. At 50, I was capable to hear the will of heaven. At 60, I was capable to hear the will of heaven without complaining. And at 70, I'm capable to do what I want without infringing the universal laws. And I think that Chuang Tzu was saying the same thing, but in a playful manner when he was speaking of the sparrow and the cicada. The sparrow would be the lower part, and the giant bird, the pung bird, would be at 70, I am capable to do what I want without infringing the universal law, meaning that we have a higher perspective. So once again, I think that the Chuang Tzu has two big qualities. It's a provocation to think deeper in a variety of ways, that one, and without logical constraints. And second, it's an invitation to the journey of the soul, because we are down with a big intellect, and that big intellect precisely is the source of the skills. And there's nothing wrong to be skillful in music, in architecture, in medicine, in what you want, but those skills has to be perceived as servants and the soul as the master. And precisely that is the invitation by Chuang Tzu. And I stop.
Thank you, Gwen. Yeah. I think everybody has a different opinion. That's great to hear different kinds of opinion. Yeah. Kimberly, please.
Just a really short, I think when you pursue skill or knowledge in order to help or, to improve things, probably most of us will agree it's okay. It's when you seek knowledge and skill for self-gratification, self-aggrandizement, it turns into sophistry. And that's where the destructive force comes. I mean, when people have a good, very effective oratory skill, that's fine. But when the orator's skill is to obfuscate and confuse people, then it becomes sophistry, and you lead people off the cliff, like some politicians or philosophers do. That's where I think that I imagine that's where he was going. Don't use the skill that you can develop to mislead people. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. Fred, please.
Yeah, just a couple of comments regarding first the value of skill, and secondly, supposedly useless skills. I think the discussion by Chuang Tzu about the value of skills versus contemplation brings to mind Plato's dialogue Gorgias, just specifically about that. Plato was debating the sophists. Sophists were arguing for the value of their particular skill, oratory skill. And Plato was arguing for that is useless because it doesn't get to causes and doesn't get to truth. And that we discover truth by contemplation rather than perfecting skills. And that in turn brings to mind a book which was popular for a little while back, Robert Pirsig's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, where he also considers Gorgias in the Zen notion of the usefulness of labor. And Pirsig makes the point that developing skills, in particular manual skills, can not only be satisfying, but also in a way illuminating or enlightening. And that's something that's missed by the attitude of Plato and perhaps of Chuang Tzu here. But to counter that, Plato was specifically talking about sophistry, the skill used in oratory. But when you think about it, that doesn't seem to be at all a useless skill. I mean, I think of, for example, of Winston Churchill's speech after the debacle of Dunkirk, where he rallied the country and said, we shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the hills, we shall fight on the streets, we will never surrender. And that was a turning point in the war, the resistance of the British against the Nazis. And finally, regarding the somewhat useless skills of the yak, I'm reminded that, you know, when I came out from a trek in Tibet, when we came out of the mountains, one of the first things we did was, but we were famished and tired, and the first thing we did coming out of the mountains was we had a fresh slaughtered yak roasted on a spit. And let me tell you, for us, eating mountain food and coming out of there, that at that moment was probably the most useful animal on earth, feeding us. So it's all relative in that respect.
Yeah, thank you. You know, and here all the comment about usefulness, skill, and then I think the Zhuangzi's answer is interesting. He stay between the usefulness and the uselessness. So probably that's the only way to do. Phil, okay. After Phil, I'm going to move to the ugly man. Look, guys, a lot of ladies are interested in the ugly man. So let's move on. Okay, Phil, please.
Yeah, I do want to respond to a skill in relationship to just developing the excellence of something versus like skill like rhetoric and sophistry to manipulate the system. Even in my lifetime, things have changed in this sense. I believe in, I still believe in, you know, that in a sense, developing your own skills that is essentially harmless or perhaps useful in society is a good thing. That was a virtue. But nowadays, people simply laugh at you like you're an idiot. Once you develop a skill, it's a stepping stone to enter the system to make profits. As an example, those people who invent a company, a thing that is useful to society, they do not develop it simply for the fact that it is going to be virtuous, useful. It is merely a stepping stone to sell it to a large company so they can make a lot of profits. If you're not in the profit train, then you're an idiot, not a virtuous person. That's in my lifetime, I've experienced that, right? Because you used to be proud of that, of the fact that you didn't sell out, but now you're just a fool for not selling out. Because do you not know that your skill really is just a stepping stone to the rewards that the corporation and society will give you? That is a synthetic skill above another synthetic skill. You know, what I call the derivative skills in culture. So I just want to say that it has changed even from an age of specialization to an age of being alienated from your own skills because you are a salesman to be a brand for something you don't even know about. You don't even drink, but you are something that will sell to society.
Thank you, Phil, for the sharing. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Before we go to the cooking, okay, that's because a lot of people, especially ladies, are interested in the ugly man. Okay. So the story is this, okay? I just make it short. Okay, Duke Ai of Lu, okay, that's a Confucius' home country. he talked about there was an ugly man in Wei named Sick Neck, and I think the Chinese name means I Tai Tuo. Okay, that means sad, horse face, and hunchback. Okay, so kind of like Koshimoto. Okay, and the man hung around with him all the time and they didn't want to leave him. Women saw him and vowed to their parents that they'd rather be his concubine than another man's wife. Very attractive man, even he's so ugly. Okay, so blah, 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 he talk about other things. Then Confucius, okay, that's an interesting part in the, especially in the inner chapters. Most of people think about Zhuangzi or Taoism is against Confucianism, but especially in the inner part, when we read, when they talk about Confucius, okay, sometimes, especially in the outer chapter, Zhuangzi may make fun of Confucius, but in the inner chapter, a lot of time, Zhuangzi consider Confucius as a great sage, so he speaks for Zhuangzi, and of course we have no reason to believe Confucius really said that. That's just a story. Okay, so we take in this chapter we take Confucius' word seriously as the mouth for Zhuangzi. Okay, he's not making fun for Confucius. So that I could say. So Confucius said, "That neck was trusted before he spoke, and was loved though he accomplished nothing." Okay, then he talked about another thing. Okay, he didn't sing, but he just harmonized. Okay, so that's why people like him. Okay, so he has kept his innate power. That's another Chinese concept called cai. That's an innate power. Keep his innate power whole and intact. Though his virtue took no form, he doesn't show his virtue, but he keep his innate power. Okay, so basically this idea is talking about you don't have to hold the skill or any virtue, but you just have to accompany, okay, compromise with other situation. And just like his Confucius say, the sick neck never sing, but he always harmonize with other sound. Okay, so this kind of behavior, this kind of innate power will make people, men and women, love him. Okay, so that's the idea he's talking about. So I just like a brief introduce this passage, and before we move on to the cooking, anything about this? Otherwise, I will move on to the cooking story. That's the main thing about this one, and then. Okay, so I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the cooking, and I think this one is important, and that's the main purpose of the today. So the cook was carving up an ox for Qin Hui of Liang. Remember 2 weeks ago, Pin talked about the mentions, okay, and the first chapter, okay, the same person, Qin Hui of Liang. Okay, he must be the very famous feudal lord during that time. So Zhuangzi also writes story about cooked in, okay, cooked in and carving up an ox for Qin Hui of Liang. Whenever his hand smacked, whenever his shoulder leaned into it, whenever his foot braced it, whenever his knee passes, the thwacking tones of flesh falling from bone will echo. And what with a zip, with a whoosh, each stroke ringing out the perfect tone, harmonized to the dance of mulberry grove and the royal symphony of the ancient sage kings. So basically he talking about he is so skillful. That's why I bring the contradiction, the main reason the author argue here, because this one seems the Zhuangzi is a praise the cooking's skill. Okay. So he talking about cooking not only cut and his behavior, the whole body movement is matched with the music. Okay, so like watching a performance. So when the king said, it is wonderful that skill can reach such height. So he performed carving ox and just like the dancing and all the sound match with music. The cook put down his knife and said, so right now, Cook Din is going to explain. What I love is the Tao, something that advances beyond mere skills. We talk about he love, it's not skill, it's Tao. When I first started cutting up oxen, I did not see anything but oxen. 3 years later, I couldn't see the whole ox. And now, I encounter them with spirit and don't look with my eyes. Sensible knowledge starts and the spiritual power proceeds. He starts talking about the process. He's cutting ox. A good cook, then here I want to draw the conclusion. A good cook changes his blade once a year because he slices. An ordinary cook changes his blade once a month because he hangs. I have been using this same blade for 19 years, cutting up thousands of oxen, and yet it is still as sharp as the day it comes off the grindstone. Okay, so he's talking about how well he is doing that, then he has a further interpretation. There are space between those joints. Okay, somebody has a noise. I'm going to mute off. Okay. Okay, there are space between those joints, and the edge of the blade has no thickness. If you use what has no thickness to go where is space, oh, there is plenty of extra room to play about it. That's why after 19 years, the blade still as though fresh from the grindstone. Nonetheless, whenever I come to a cluster tangle, realizing that it is difficult to do anything about it, my gaze settles, my movement slows, my blade moves slightly. Then all at once, I find the ox already dismembered at my feet like clumps of soil scattered on the ground. So the last sentence, okay, he described all the process he's doing, how skillful he is. The knife is so thin, so it's never been resistant. I stand holding my blade and graze all around, dwelling on my accomplishment. Then I clean my blade and put it away. So the interesting answer is, when the king see it, the king said, wonderful. From hearing the words of Cook Din, I have learned how to nourish life. Okay, I think that's the point. And then just like to share my own experience, I learned this one and I really like the last sentence, okay? Talk about I standing, holding my blade and the grace all around during my accomplishment, okay? Then I clean my blade and put it away. I think this writing is beautiful. And I kind of like treat this sentence as my lifetime goal. Okay, I'm thinking about, okay, you should focus on something, not focus on the skill. I think that's my interpretation, okay? You should master your skill, but not stick on the skill itself, okay? Focus on Tao. And then everything will move smoothly. And then you probably only master one thing, but that thing is Tao, okay? So I think that's what Cook Din's interpretation. But the interesting is the king's answer is not like, what a wonderful skill. The king's answer is, I have learned how to nourish the life, okay? So that's the interest part. That's why the author drew the conclusion. And I think, personally, I think it's interesting. Okay, Zhuangzi is presenting the cook skill for our admiration, celebrating the skill and associating it in some way with nourishing life. I don't mean to deny the obvious interpretation of this passage, but in the context of the inner chapter as a whole, this passage is an outliner. Considering what Zhuangzi says elsewhere, we might do better to take the knife as our model rather than the cook. I think this one is an interesting interpretation. So this sentence, let me think about. Actually, the king said, the whole focus, the king said, what a wonderful skill. He is not talking about the skill of the cooking. He's talking about the blade. The whole focus, okay, from the king is not the cook. He focused on the knife. All he look is the knife. So what the King Hui of Liang learned is from the knife, not from the cook. So he see the knife move around without encounter any resistance, okay? Move so smoothly. So he learned from the knife, from the blade, and he said, that's I have learned about nourish my life. So I think that's the author's argument. And I think that's interesting, at least in my point of view. And I never think about this before for, I say, 40 years. So that's why I really appreciate this one. And I know a lot of people say, oh, no, that's wrong. That's interpretation, but that's misinterpretation. But I think that's wonderful, okay, at least. And that I kind of feel like I was a joke, okay, I become a joke because I think I'm being tried to perform in my life as a cooked in, but turn out people probably interested is not cooked in, is the knife. So that's something worth to think about it. So that's, I like to share the thing, and I see a lot of hands up. I don't know if you guys agree or disagree or want to criticize, but that's fine. I don't know who's first, so I'm going to, from my screen to the order, from Fred, please.
Put me down in the agree column. I totally agree with this. It's a wonderful story. I get this when I do woodworking, where you always let the blade do the work. You don't push it. And if you try to force it, not only does it do a poorer job, but it ends up taking longer, sometimes a lot longer than if you just let the blade make the cut. And I also see that, and it also affects the way you think about life in general, and which is the point, I think, of this story. There's a larger lesson there, and that you don't force your way necessarily through life. You let things take. If you work in a group, it's the group that solves the problem. Even if you're the leader, it's the group that solves the problem. You don't force the problem through. And I just think that's a wonderful, wonderful story.
So do you agree the model is the blade, not the cooked in? Yes,
the model is the blade. Yeah. It's
okay.
The blade. It's the group. It's that's what gets the work done. And
okay, thank you.
Satisfaction.
So I'm good. Okay, so before you speak, please tell me you see the model is a blade or the cooked in. Okay, so that means, so before you make your statement. So Pin, please.
Yeah, the model is the blade. This story is one of my favorites, always one of my most memorable ones. I also studied it, I think probably first read it when I was 14 or something. And what I disagree with the author is that saying that this story is an outlier in Zhuangzi. I don't know where he got that idea from. And so to me, the chapter, right in the title is about nourishing life. And then in the first paragraph is basically saying that this chapter is going to tell us about how to protect your body and complete your life. And the ox is a metaphor of the world that we're living in and that we have to negotiate with. And the knife is a metaphor for ourselves. How do you go through this world without damaging your blade, without being yourself being harmed. And to me, a couple of things are kind of the key statements. One is that there are voids in the joints, but the knife has no thickness. And that's what allows the knife to journey through these voids with such ease and without being harmed and just cutting things apart. So if you make yourself and your ego small, there's a lot of room. Whereas if you do the opposite, you're going to see the world as everything is against you and you're hitting against hard walls all the time. Or if you decide that your life's goal is to conquer and achieve in the mundane sense, you're gonna damage your blade a lot. You're always trying to subdue others. And another thing is the part where he sees a particularly difficult joint, right, where everything is knotted together. So this is in life where a metaphor when we see a very difficult situation. There's a lot of different things involved and all their interests and emotions and wants are all tied up in a knot. And instead of trying, I think Fred said something like this too, instead of trying to jump in and be overly active, saying that I'm just going to force through things, I'm going to settle these people or whatever, is you stop, look at it, you might take a step back, and you might just make a very subtle movement, and everything just falls apart. And another thing is the last part where the part where you said you find really beautiful, one of your favorite quotes, to me is also know when to stop. When you feel like you're satisfied, you're standing here there looking around, feeling really good, maybe that's the time to put your blade away. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Pin. Let me ask you one question. Okay, since we read probably in the early age. So do you know the role model is the knife, not the cook before?
Oh, yeah. I always thought that, right.
Oh,
yeah, the knife is a metaphor for life. And how do you 游刃有余, right? That's a four character idiom. It's
yeah, okay. So you probably more
Taoism. Journey with a blade with lots of room. So yeah. This story is really with the origin of that.
So you always know it's the knife, not the cook.
Right.
Okay, so you are smarter.
But the cook is what makes the story beautiful. You really picture this such a masterful person and basically performing music and dance, butchering a cow. That's really what makes that what stick in your mind, I think. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. I'm not that smart. When I read for 40 years, I always think about the cook and I never think about the knife. So when Pin talk about 游刃有余, that's a famous say, like when you move the knife, I also think about the person who handle the knife, not the knife itself. So I think you can see people with a different view and see things totally different. So I think in this part, Pin is better. Okay.
Well, not better, but I think maybe when I was 14, that was a time where I had a lot of challenges. So it's all circumstances.
Does anybody tell you this, or you just think about by yourself?
All by myself. I was,
okay, nobody tell me this. But I just not too much. So we have a lot of hands up. Sorry for our conversation on this, but yeah, Phil, please. Phil, your turn.
Okay. I see it slightly differently. I do not agree with you. I mean, I agree with your interpretation about the knife, but I see it as a union between the knife and the cook. The cook must somehow learn the aspects of the knife. I authenticate this in the sense when I was in high school and I was learning wrestling, and I did not understand how anybody could actually wrestle in a good way, because whatever I did, I thought about it, and the other guy seemed somehow to be faster than I am. And I think what happened is sometime in my junior year, right before the junior year, something happened, and that I became an automatic mover, and that responded to the dance, you want to call it that way, and that it quite often involves the knot, as you say, where you make a move, the other guy makes a counter move, you make a counter to the counter, and so forth. And all of this is, if you thought about it, you will lose because you're too slow. But somehow you have accomplished some kind of union with the technique itself. But the way I feel it is the way that it came to me is like, no, I had to learn the techniques first, and then it became incorporated in my movements, and it became a union of the two, and I became just as fast, maybe faster than the other guy, because it was almost automatic, right? But I think that's when you become like very good at what you do. You know, some people say a master. I dare not say that I was a master in wrestling, but I became very good at it. And I think you just can't jump to being the master. You have to learn something first and then translate it into a dance, because you can't just go out there and dance without understanding something else first.
I agree with Phil. You can't separate the knife and the one moving the knife. Yeah.
Quinn, please. Quinn, your turn.
Yes. Sorry, I just activate my microphone. So I would like to say that I think that the answer is, both answers are good. The blade or the butchers. Why? Because the blade is important because the ego of the butcher disappears. And that's what I meant when I was speaking that the intellect has to be the servant of the master, which is pure consciousness, or the Tao, if you want. So as Phil just said, of course, you cannot be pure consciousness as one, okay? You have to go through a learning process, okay? You have to go through the ABC, and you have to practice your exercises and so on, either music, wrestling, or anything that we can learn with our human brain on earth. But in a more general sense, and I agree with Pin, he said that it's a metaphor for life, and I think that's the supreme metaphor for life. And I think that the story of the butcher and the ox is probably one of the supreme masterpieces of Chinese philosophy and literature, because it's a superb and supreme metaphor and parable for how to navigate through life. Okay, because the knife is an instrument, okay, and the intellect is an instrument too. But if that instrument is not guided by a higher consciousness, what Confucius meant by 50, at 60, or at 70, okay, when Confucius said, at 70, I'm capable to do what I want without infringing the universal laws, meaning that the master, the guy or the woman at Tao, is capable to use his instrument, the intellect, without harming himself or others. And when the butcher is cutting the ox, but perfectly without breaking the knife, it has been said before me, it's because at the level of the Tao, he's capable to use his instrument, his intellect, his body in a so supreme way that he will not damage himself or others or the environment. I think that's the lesson of that story. And that's all.
Thank you, Quinn. Okay, we have Karen, please.
Yeah, thank you for this article and for bringing my attention to this story, which I think is wonderful. It did seem to me that all of the stories illustrate maybe not so much a dismissal of skill, but just a exploration of all the different things that can be involved in understanding what skill is, right? So we've talked about utility. So you might think of skill as doing something useful, but there are issues about that, right? If it's too useful, then you might be manipulated by others. If it's not useful enough, you might also be dismissed. There's effort. In terms of like the way you have to acquire skills through sustained effort. There's exertion, like doing things while you're skilled, like, effort during a skill. There's cognition, there's the intellect, there's perception, tools, reputation, all of these things that come into skill. And this story is, I think, a beautiful illustration of what I think modern psychologists call flow, right? Mm-hmm. I guess how do you say it's Csikszentmihalyi, the famous guy who talks about flow, about there could be a level of skillful activity where the skill almost disappears, right? Because the kind of conscious effort that you needed prior to attaining that level of skill indicated some sort of obstacles to the smooth and engaged performance of the activity. And once you get to this level where you can attain flow, you almost disappear into, the self almost disappears into the activity. And it's one of the most rewarding human experiences that we can have, right? Where you're one with what you're doing. And so that's what I think about the example of the knife. We see how there's this history of Kuk Ting and how he had to intellectualize the activity, how he had to use perception, right, to carefully see what he was doing and to sort of at some point, say, okay, am I doing this right? Is there more to be seen here? Is there more to be observed here? So we've had the intellect, we have perception, we have effort, right? He said it used to be hard. I used to have to put a lot of work into carving up an ox. But there's a progression there to this moment where he goes beyond all of those individual pieces of it, right? He has to, he stops over intellectualizing it. He even stops perceiving, right? It becomes spiritual. It reminded me of, baseball players who hit the ball without actually seeing the ball. But you had to spend a lot of time seeing balls to get to that level, right? That they don't actually, it comes at them too fast for them to perceive it. So yeah, I just thought that this was a wonderful example. So I guess in the debate about whether or not it's the knife or the cook, I agree with that. It's got to be both, right? That one part of developing skill to this level is understanding your tools and realizing that given the thinness of the knife and the width of the spaces that the knife is trying to seek, what's required here is not effort of like muscle activity or really concentrating, but just letting your experience combine with your tool to find what is naturally there to be done, right? And just let it happen, given all of that, expertise that you bring to the situation. So so I don't know that I agree with the author's conclusion that this is about dismissing skill rather than just being at play with all these different things that are involved in skill.
Thank you, Karen. Yeah, but I'm not sure the author talk about dismissing the skill. He probably talk about different kind of skill, and my concern is here, and is the king talk about I learned how to nourish the life. Does the king learn anything from the cook about nourishing the life? I think the king probably didn't learn anything about nourishing life from the cook. He learned from the bread. That's my point. And that's why I think also make a good point. At least, I think I always think, kind of wondering why the king learned how to nourish life. Okay, and I think he learned from the bread, not from the from the cook. So that's
what the text in Chinese actually said is the king said, "Great."
I heard about your
after I heard what Butcher Dean said, I learned about nourishing life. So it's not about the person, it's about what he heard he said. So yeah,
that's why I think he heard, but his eye is on the knife. And then he learned not from the cook, from the knife. That's I learned, you know, in this.
But I think the cook and the knife is the same thing, right? It's one thing. I do agree with what Phil said. There's one without the other is meaningless.
Yeah, I agree. But I kind of shocked is I should rephrase my word again. I probably shocked is I put not enough focus on the knife. I probably put too much focus on the cook.
Right.
Yeah, we have Dave, please.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I vote for the cook.
Okay.
I'm an engineer, and to me, carving an ox is a problem. And we're talking about cutting into one joint, but there's a lot of joints around here. And you've got to, after you've carved 1,000 oxen, you decide which is the correct order, because one cut can affect another cut. And also what little I know about butchery, what are the choice cuts? You know, how to attack this area to get the best steaks, for example, what thicknesses, and whether you're cutting against the grain or with the grain of the muscle. This is a very involved process. It's not just, okay, I'm going to start cutting. And, you know, how hard I press, what angle I attack with the blade, very difficult. But things, once you master this and understand it, then it almost becomes automatic because you know the answer to the problem. But, okay, the knife is the tool and it has to be sharpened correctly. But no, it's the cook. Thank you, but great session today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Mandarin, please.
Yes, Dave, thank you for setting up my comments for me. I had been thinking about the word nourish, and then it got me to thinking about the entire scene that this presents, as if it were a story, as if we were watching a film, say. So we have this truly enormous big dead body of an ox. It is dead, it is bloody, it's going to be a mess. So here's this guy cutting it up and doing his work while the king is there. And it's going to be food. People are going to eat this. This is its main purpose of this whole entire activity, is food preparation. And so when I look at the words at the end, I have learned how to nourish life. I was wondering, it's kind of an odd phrase in English. It would imply more putting fertilizer on plants. So it seems as if the king is saying, perhaps I have learned more about how to take on the responsibilities that I have for my people. In other words, to make their life conditions so that they can work, so that they can use their skills, so that they can eat. I have to learn how to be skillful about it. But I don't really know what, if he means life in the human sense, because he is standing right in front of a big, a lot of food, which is the big dead ox, all cut up. So he's talking about feeding people, but it also is a parallel of, is he talking about, I've learned how to use skill to nourish a spiritual life and Tao in my kingship capabilities? So the nourish life, I kind of got stuck on that.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I would just like to mention this chapter, this one is put in a special chapter, okay, and called the Nourishing Life. The name of the chapter called Nourishing Your Life, okay. So, and this one is very short. And unlike others, much longer. This one is very, very short, okay. and they're all related to how to nourish your life. It starts with my life is limited, but the pursuing knowledge is unlimited. That's how this chapter started. Okay, and then talk about the cooking, and then talk about the chicken. Okay, the chicken, and talk about the Laozi when he died, and somebody cried. So all talk about your own life. So of course, like you can have a different interpretation, but I just like to point out this chapter is put in the very special chapter and very short and all related to take care of your own life. I think that's okay. Tony, please.
Yeah, I also see a problem with the author taking the knife over the cook as a role model. I think that the biggest problem with that is that it may encourage passivity, because if you take a look at it, what is the knife? I mean, the knife is an object that requires someone skillful holding it and guiding it, and achieving an end, using it to achieve an end. So it's. If the knife is the role model, then we're basically we're delegating to an external rather than an internal locus of control, and we're giving up agency, which I don't see. I don't see a lot of practical value in that. The other thing that that was also come to my mind was that regarding the story. The question was, maybe it's a celebration of the knife's passivity rather than the cook's skill. I see a problem with that as well, because I think that's a flawed perspective, because I get it that the knife is a tool that facilitates the exercise of skill, but nonetheless, I mean, even if you have a good knife, i.e., you have a good tool. That will facilitate skill, all things being equal, if you hand it to someone who doesn't know what they're doing with it, they're still at the end of the day going to end up hacking the ox and damaging the knife itself. So those are some thoughts that that come to my mind. Thanks.
Thank you, Tony. I like to mention is a passivity. Okay, passive may not be a bad thing for Zhuangzi's philosophy. So I just like to mention, so a lot of things he just kind of reverse what we are thinking in the regular day. Thank you. SK, please.
Hey, yeah. So I think the story basically starts with King commending the cook, saying, "Hey, what an amazing skill you have," and it goes on and on and on, and then here's the final line, right? This consciousness, I'm standing holding the blade, so he's talking about all the senses here. Like I'm holding the blade, I'm glancing around, and I'm dwelling on my accomplishments. So this is his mind, right? That I have done all of this stuff. So I'm going to work on this. And then what do? I clean my blade and I put it away. Like I don't give myself gold stars or 5 stars or anything like that. So I am using my senses to do the action, and then I forget about it. So the king was trying to focus on the skill, but then King says, "Hey, that sentence that you just uttered was amazing, because you basically helped me understand. So this is the nourishment of life. Life basically means that I'm a conscious being. What do I do with this consciousness?" And that line basically brought King to his senses about like what was he saying when he said, "It's not about the skill, man. This is about me, the consciousness within me."
Thank you, SK. I really appreciate your interpretation. It's interesting. Yeah, thank you. Phil, please.
Yeah,
here's no standard answer. Okay, so I think that's the purpose of Zhuangzi, and that's also purpose of our meetup.
Well, I have a deeper problem with this that's in a sense outside of the story. So I'm going to excuse the story itself because the problem is always a matter of framing. How do you frame the unlimited within the limited structure of your understanding? And I think the problem there is the framing is always going to be a misinterpretation of the realities. Because my first thought is that's outside of this framing is that what does he mean by nourishing life? Nourish, the whole context is about human life, human culture, and he's saying there's something about metaphors is able to say something that it gives half the answer but is incomplete because it didn't nourish the oxen's life. It didn't nourish nature. So it's outside of the framing of the human context. I have a problem with that, but I do understand the problem of civilization. I understand that we too live and we too have to kill in order to survive. I understand all of that, but the framing already shuts off all the other possibilities until the present moment when we realize that we are going to kill nature altogether, right? By just framing it as a frame of civilization and human existence. So a metaphor is probably better than a direct statement because a metaphor at least leaves open the infinite that's beyond our total understanding and say, maybe we should cool it. I mean, so I'm not complaining about him framing it that way because that's what the whole structure is about. But on the other hand, it does sort of leave out all sorts of other things that should have been in the question of nourishing life.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. I think you are not totally out because the very first sentence on this chapter, Zhuangzi said, talk about limited and unlimited. He talked about our life is limited and the knowledge is unlimited. If you use your limited life to pursue the unlimited knowledge, you are in trouble. Okay, that's the very first sentence he talked about. Then he talked about a lot of metaphor, a lot of story. So what you said is exactly what Zhuangzi want to tell you, the framing, the unlimited with our limited life. I think that's the key on the first, at least on the first sentence. You know, that's the only teaching or only non-parable he's talking about. He put a lot of story, but the first sentence he talked about how can you frame the unlimited knowledge with your limited life? You know, that's he's talking about. So probably that's the key. You know, so Quinn, please.
Yes. I would like to say that I don't remember in what chapter exactly, but I'm sure it's from the Chuang Tzu, and it's written the supreme joy is without joy, and the supreme glory is without glory, and I think that it summarizes very much Chuang Tzu philosophy. It means that, and I want to make a link with the concept of yang sheng to nourish life, because life here, in my opinion, has to be understood as the dynamic element in us, which is awareness and or consciousness, as one of my colleagues said 5 or 10 minutes ago. Okay, and for Chuang Tzu, our human life in the human form on Earth is a window. It's a framing of that universal life. But we have the possibility, and here maybe I wouldn't be kicked in the butt by the friends of the animals, but I wouldn't take the risk. We as humans, we have a bigger intellect, so we have a bigger chance to go into the infinite journey of consciousness than animals. And that is our luck, if you want, or at the same time, the possibility of our downfall. if we limit ourselves to the intellect, and for me, when Confucius gave the steps of development of the human soul by speaking of 15 years old, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, I would hypothesize that 30 correspond to the intellect, okay? And in everyday life, when you are 30, you just finish college, you begin to work and so on. So it's a step of life that your intellect is very useful, okay? If you can find bright solutions and so on at your company, you will be appreciated by your boss or your colleagues. So it's a useful step, it's a useful instrument, it's a useful tool, but the lessons of Confucius and of Zhuangzi, because we're speaking of Zhuangzi today, is not to stay at that level of life that is called intellect. That there are more, there are bigger framings that wait for us if we make the effort to go on journey of the awareness development or the epistemological development. And definitely to make a link with what Madeline said 10 minutes ago, Yang Sheng or to Nourish Life, for me, it's clear that it's about awareness. It's about the spiritual journey. Okay? And it has a consequence on the body anyway, because if you are on your spiritual journey, you will be less violent towards yourself, you will be less violent towards others and the environment, and inevitably it will have a good impact on your body anyway. But I think that the core is the spiritual journey, and not simply being healthy in the bodily meaning. And I will finish with the idea of agency. I think that Chuang Tzu is not inviting us to abandon or to relinquish agency. On the contrary, he invites us to let higher powers to descend on us. So we will be endowed with higher powers for our agency, rather than to limit ourselves to the agency of the intellect, okay? Because most of us will identify ourselves to the intellect, and the intellect is a step in the journey of the soul, but it's not the last step in the journey of the soul. And if I take the map offered by Confucius, the intellect is at the symbolic age of 30 years old. So we still have the symbolic age of 40 years old, of 50 years old, of 60 years old, and of 70 years old. And 70 years old precisely is the moment when I can do what I want without infringing the universal law. And I think that, on the contrary, it's not an invitation to relinquish agency, but on the contrary, it's an invitation to have the highest quality of agency possible. And I have.
Thank you, Quen. Okay, Pin, let me wait for a moment before we conclude today's meetup. I'd like to share quickly on the chapter 27 on the Dao De Jing, also talk about skill, and probably give you a think about what kind of skill Laozi and Zuangzi are talking about. So chapter 27, I only take the first part of 27. Okay, so the Dao De Jing said, the skillful move, leaving no traces to follow. The skillful speak, leaving no flaws to blame. The skillful enumerate, using no counters. The skillful are able to shut the gates using no bars, but they cannot be opened. Okay, the skillful bound using no ropes, but their knots cannot be untied. Okay, so that's different kind of, or the same kind, depending on what your interpretation, different kind of usefulness or skillfulness. Okay, they are talking about. But that's, I like to give you a reference to think about different kind of skillfulness, so-called, okay, in Zhuangzi, in Laozi, and in our daily life. So Pim, I will have you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. First of all, boy, everyone's making such excellent points. When each person speak, I have the urge to jump in just to say, oh, I totally agree with what you just said. And so thanks, everyone. Like you said, it's a very short chapter, has 5 sections. I thought since we're studying this, it'd be a shame if we don't at least have a synopsis of this chapter, because there are different aspects. So maybe I can just take 2 minutes to do that. The first section you already said, it opens with this statement, our lives have bounds, but knowledge has no bounds. Using the bounded to follow the boundless, you're bound to be tired or exhausted. And then it goes into the story of the butcher. And then the third story is one person sees another person and sounded shocked and said, who are you? Why do you only have one leg? Is it heavenly? In Chinese, heavenly means natural, born like that. Is it heavenly or is it man-caused? And the person said, it's heavenly, not man-caused. The form that I am was given by heaven. Heaven in classical Chinese is nature. It's given by nature. It's conceived by nature. And the image of a person having 2 legs, that's a human perception. This is how you know it's heavenly and not man-made. So this, again, is challenging our normal conceptions of things and what things should be and should not be. And then the fourth story is about the wild pheasant, basically roaming around looking for food and drinking in the wild. And that pheasant does not wish to be raised in a cage. The one that's in the cage, even though it looks prestigious and well, but it's not a good thing. So, and then the final story is about at the funeral of Laozi. A friend went and just cried 3 times and left. So Laozi's students confronted him, said, aren't you a friend? If you're a friend, why did you, was kind of disrespectful or whatever, didn't cry enough. So basically the point, his reply was that he realized that being born and dying is all part of nature. And there's nothing, that emotion shouldn't enter into this. And in a sense, passing away is nature's way to relieve you from a lot of suffering. And I find the concluding sentence very interesting.
Yeah.
And a lot of room for interpretation. It said, the oil is exhausted by the match fire, burning on and on. And we don't know the end. And the normal interpretation, we don't know the end refers to the fire. Basically, the oil will be spent, but fire keeps going on because fire is part of nature. So I just, it just occurred to me that the concluding sentence corresponds to the opening sentence, because opening sentence is talking about something that has bound and something that has no bound. And then the concluding sentence is talking about something that basically has bounds, that is, exhaustible, and something that never ends. I don't know if that's intentional by Zhuangzi or not. Anyway, that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I find out this chapter probably worth to read carefully, because that's one of the few, it's short and seems much more organized than other chapter, right? Like the first chapter, you can say it's organized, but not really, kept in the same. So This one is short and with full story. And just like you said, the beginning and the end, they match each other. And it's unusual in Chinese philosophy talk about fire. I think Chinese like to talk about water instead of fire. And talk about fire sounds more Indian philosophy.
Right.
Phil, please.
Yeah, I gotta say something about fire because it just reminded me right at the instant when Caruso, the great tenor of the turn of the 20th century, when he was asked, like, in your house there are many precious things. If there's a fire in your house, what would be the first thing you carry out? And his answer was the fire. Of course, that was a romantic answer, but nonetheless, it does echo fire.
Okay, great. I think we suppose we finish it today, and then